Members, we have two apologies today, Michael Copeland and Megan Fearon.
Alex may not be coming.
Alex may not be coming. Okay, we don't know about Alex Atwood or the Deputy Chair, Vice Chair. Okay.
Brenda will be
And Brenda, I think, is expected. Okay, members, with your permission, I welcome everybody to the public gallery, including Duncan Joy from Wellington College and Erin Ballantyne from Bloomfield Collegiate, my old school, shockingly, when they took boys. Okay, members, the Finance Minister has made a statement to the Assembly regarding the outcome of the consultation for the 15-16 budget. And as you know, there was a debate in plenary last week. Can I suggest we invite officials to provide a written briefing on the implications for the budget allocation for OFMDFM and the arm's length bodies? Or does anybody see a need to ask the ministers? Do we know if it's common practice for ministers to have briefed their committees on this?
A number of committees have had the ministers up, but I'm not sure exactly how many or whether it's all at this point.
Any strong feeling?
Quite happy with the officials. Yeah.
Happy with officials? Yeah? Okay. Page 10 of your packs, you'll see an invitation to the Town Centre's Futures Conference. It's been held in Bangor, County Down, Thursday the 12th of February. Would members please respond directly if they're intending to attend? And can I also remind members of the Landscape Futures event, which we are sponsoring as a committee. It's on Monday coming at lunchtime. A Politics Plus seminar, which has been led by Daniel Greenberg on the subject of legislative scrutiny, has been arranged for ourselves immediately after our meeting next week. This will aid us in our scrutiny of the Children's Services Cooperation Bill specifically, as well as looking more generally at other legislation which may come our way. So, members, can I say everybody is welcome to invite staff to attend this training, as we think they may also find it useful. That's next week. And could I ask that you let the committee staff know if you are intending to come and if you're bringing anybody with you, just so we have an idea of numbers. A copy of the committee's current invitations is at page 15 of your pack. There's no comment on that. We move on to the draft minutes of the meeting of the 21st of January, beginning at page 17. I've been advised that the time at which the meeting of the 21st of January moved into open session has been omitted in the draft minutes. So for the record, the meeting moved into open session at 2:15 p.m. This has been corrected in the minutes that have been prepared for signature today. So are members content to agree these draft minutes as amended?
Agreed.
Thank you. Next, members, the one-year extension to the Historical Institutional Abuse Inquiry was agreed by the Assembly yesterday in plenary. At page 24 in your packs, you'll see correspondence from Savia in relation to the extension which was circulated to you separately on Friday afternoon. Further correspondence from Savia has been received and is in tabled papers between pages 4 to 7. I paused in case members have any comments to make, but I think the issues were pretty well aired in plenary. Yeah. Okay. Now, we've not met since the Children's Services Cooperation Bill passed its second stage. It's now been referred to us for consideration. Public advertisements requesting comment on the bill and its clauses were placed in the press last Friday. We'd also agreed to ask Assembly Research to draw up a list of stakeholders to which the committee may wish to write specifically. Members, if you go to page 26 of your packs, you'll see that the list is nothing if not extensive. A wide range of voluntary community and statutory organisations to the number 160. So we could be here sometime. So there's a draft letter to stakeholders in tabled papers at page 8. members have any comment on the list? I mean, it seems to me that trying to edit it is not a path we want to go down. Have people had the opportunity to look at the draft letter, which says in table packs on page 8?
Half of them here.
Seems spot on, yeah.
What I was wondering, what about doing this as a sort of template? What do you think?
We could include a template, and generally for bills, we would ask that comments are made in relation to the specific clauses, because that makes it easier to kind of gather all the information, the evidence together. So we could include a template with this letter along those lines.
Yeah, I'm just concerned, members, if a very significant number of the 160 respond and respond in great detail, given we're also doing our T-Buck inquiry, we're going to put quite an onerous burden on the committee staff. One way of doing it perhaps would be to template something that says, here are the clauses, and you have 200 words maximum in each block.
Yeah. So it needs to be focused in, yeah, I agree. Sounds a good idea, Chair.
I think too, you should add in the policy areas associated with those clauses,
Yeah.
and then people will have a better understanding of it.
Very, very specifically focused. Yeah.
Sorry, can I also ask the fourth paragraph where it says to arrive no later than Friday? Is that
The date will be put in there
Right,
before we,
okay.
yeah, sorry, it's just a draft. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not this Friday, sorry.
So what do you think? Should we try and put some sort of controls on the volume?
There has to be.
Yes? Okay.
Other way.
Okay, so you're content that staff, the committee staff, work on that?
Agreed, absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. And also, members, we would propose to issue the same information to all departments and organisations specifically listed at Clause 4 of the bill, because they're the ones likely to be most impacted. So I take it we're agreeable to that? Okay. Page 30, members, list of outstanding correspondence. In the absence of comment, then can I refer you to the correspondence summary sheet at page 32. That's all correspondence received since our last meeting, and I'm going to ask the clerk to highlight items she thinks will require a decision. You are, of course, at liberty to raise any matter of correspondence at this time.
Thanks, Chair. The first item I'd like to refer members to is at page 53. It's a response from the Department of Education to queries from the committee about the composition of the Community Relations, Equality and Diversity Interboard panel. And it's just to get members' agreement to add that to the papers for the inquiry.
Agreed.
Okay. Secondly, I'd like to refer members to the correspondence from the Minister of Enterprise, Trade and Investment regarding the Belfast Islamic Centre, and just to ask if members are content to forward that response out to the Belfast Islamic Centre.
Can I just say, in that letter, it says Invest NI has built up an impressive list of contacts in the region with the objective of building our export sales and foreign direct investment potential, of course. But then it says it would be detrimental to Invest in Northern Ireland's network to use these links to fundraise for private individuals or charitable organisations. I'm just making the point I didn't understand in what way it would be detrimental. But
It wouldn't be a department's job to fundraise. It's up to individual organisations to try and do
I don't
that.
think anybody's suggesting that they fundraise.
they were looking for, the Islamic Centre were looking for contacts, not for any, and they weren't looking for anything beyond, is there a name we can contact and do our own sort of fundraising lobbying? Just wonder why. Anyway, look, that's the response. Shall we forward it to the Islamic Centre?
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, thank you.
And the final item, just to refer members to at this point, is page 63, correspondence from the AERC committee regarding equal pay settlement for former NIO and PSNI staff. It's just to check if members are content to forward that on to the Finance and Personnel Committee, as that department would have the lead in equal pay, and also to our Justice Committee, because it involves PSNI staff.
Agree.
Okay.
Yep.
And that's all I'd like to bring to your attention at this point.
Okay,
Chair.
Cathy, thank you very much. Any other correspondence, members, or should we press on? A few housekeeping notes before we get into our first oral briefing. First of all, can I thank everybody who attended the stakeholder event last Wednesday. Good turnout, even though the weather was pretty inclement. I thought it was very useful, and some clear themes emerging. Anyway, a report summarising the main themes will be with the committee as soon as it's compiled. The committee's agreed to an external meeting at Interaction Belfast in West Belfast. That's in a couple of weeks' time, Wednesday the 18th, starting at 2 as usual. But members who'd previously expressed interest in visiting the Suffolk Community Pocket Plots Initiative. And this can be scheduled for immediately before the meeting on the 18th. And we can also have lunch at Interaction Belfast if we so wish. So the proposal, therefore, would be we go up to Suffolk and visit Community Pocket Plots, and then down for lunch, and then the meeting starting at 2 o'clock at Interaction Belfast. So what time would we be starting?
We'd be aiming to start the meeting at 2.
Sorry, what time would we need to
Sorry,
be at
about
Suffolk?
1 p.m. probably. Or,
Not enough time?
yeah, it would be very short.
Okay.
Very short meeting.
So 1 o'clock start at Suffolk.
Provided that we're out of our committee meetings that morning.
You have a committee meeting that morning?
Yeah,
Right. What time is that finished, Bronwyn, roughly,
well,
normally?
it all depends on what briefings are on.
Half 12ish. Regional development as well, but
Yeah, I'm in the same boat, Chair, but it shouldn't be a problem. It's usually finished about half.
it should be all right.
Shall we go for a meeting? I don't want us to be turning up with 2 people.
Just remind me of the date, Chairman.
It's this day fortnight, 18th.
Well, I'll be there, just mightn't be there at exactly 1, but I'll be there.
Well, would members reasonably relaxed that we could maybe knock the committee meeting start time back if we have to?
Yeah, might be sensible.
Because I think unless we've got, a sort of half reasonable representation of the committee at Suffolk, it doesn't do us huge credit, even though we can explain absences. Okay. Now, the first of 2 briefings from the Northern Ireland Local Government Association and our members. Nilga are speaking us with regard to our inquiry into Together Building a United Community. The first briefing is going to look at District Council Good Relations programmes, and then the second one will be on community planning. This briefing was originally scheduled for the 10th of December, but was postponed because of the pressure of business at the time. So I'd like to thank Karen Smith from Nilga, who's helped facilitate the evidence sessions today, and also for her cooperation because it was a very late cancellation of the previous scheduled meeting. A number of papers in your packs, members, relevant to both these sessions. Clark's brief is available at page 85, and that covers both community relations and community planning. The committee received written submissions from Ballymena Borough Council, Banbridge District Council, Belfast City Council, Derry City Council, Newton Abbey Borough Council and Strabane District Council. They're in your packs beginning at page 161. A short briefing paper from Nilga is available at page 96. And extracts from the NISRA evaluation of the District Council Good Relations Programme are available at page 100. An extract from a report by the Northern Ireland Strategic Migration Partnership on minority ethnic demographics is provided at page 11 of Tabled. And finally, at page 126 of your main pack, you'll see a paper from Assembly Research, which outlines community relations funding for groups through local councils over the years 2011 to 2014. Members, before we begin, are members content that the briefing paper from Nilga and the research paper are included in the appendices of the inquiry report when we finally publish. Thank you very much. Okay, so we welcome Alderman Tom Eakin of Belfast City Council, Sue Divan, Good Relations Officer of Derry City Council, and Angela Askin of Derry City Council. Tom, are you making the opening remarks?
Yes, Chairman, I'll make a couple of remarks. I was told to keep it very short, which I will do. Delighted that Nilga have been invited here to make a presentation and to answer your questions. It reflects the importance of Nilga now with the change of local government. And if you want to get clarity of purpose, you speak to Nilga in future. It's taken some time to get here, but I think that all the councillors are buying into it. So thank you very much for inviting us. We have issued you with various responses, therefore there's no point in me reciting it. I assume you've all read them all. I think it's very important, and we in local government realise that we're taking on a lot more responsibilities and know that it's going to be a difficult time and know there's a lot of work to be done. But it means that not only have the councils, the new councils got to work, but they've got to work in tandem with the other departments. And this is a thing we've talked about in the past, but hasn't really delivered particularly well. So that's all I'm saying at this time, except could we get the spelling right next time on Alderman?
Oh.
Thank you. Not that levity.
Oldie man.
Hand over to you, Chairman.
Okay, point taken on your. Sorry about your sign. Everybody else is okay. Sue, Angela, is there anything you want to add by way of opening remarks?
I suppose it's from Derry City Council Community Relations team. We're delighted to be here. We're happy to take whatever questions you have. We have a few key points which we've put in the written submission we made, which we can reiterate if you want, but really it was to give ministers a chance to question about the programme.
Okay, I suppose the first thing that we need to establish is what your impression has been since TBUC was announced and the degree to which you feel that you were consulted and that your expertise has inputted into the proposal and how it is planned to implement it.
Well, Chairman, if I answer my version and then Derry City can make their comments. This is just another of the 5 generic statements that's come through over the last 10 years, that there's wonderful statements of intent, but nothing seems to back it up. And the most recent one, I think, is the Stormont House Agreement, where there are words written. And yes, I accept that the words are written, but what we found in Belfast was that if there was something more substantial put to it, that if in fact there was unique leadership, and an example of where the, by unique I mean a single leadership, when I asked the question of the junior minister, who do I speak to about TBUC in Belfast, I was given 3 names of people that were the people I had to speak to, but I wanted one name of the person to speak to, the most responsible person. So that's where Belfast has found that it's been general. There's no specific targets or goals. Nobody in charge is kind of left to the council to find its own way. The other departments are not necessarily playing a part that is coherent. So that's where Belfast broadly is. So I'll leave it to Sue, perhaps, or Angela.
Just before that, Tom, so just for clarity, the 3 names, all departmental officials in OFMDFM or not?
I'm sorry?
Who were the 3 names that you were told to speak to? Were these officials?
The person I spoke to was minister, and there were officials at DOJ and OFMDF and somewhere else, I think. But when I was given 3 names, at that point I sort of said, well, that answers my question. The problem is that we don't have somebody that we can go to and say, right, let's coordinate this thing. Let's do it in a sort of business-like manner. Very difficult job to do, but it's a job that has to be done.
Okay, but 3 officials from 3 separate departments, as far as you recall.
I couldn't say whether I was given 3 names, and there are 2 departments that were mentioned.
These 2 departments. Okay, Angela, Sue.
Okay, I'd say initially I think we had some consultative input into TBUC, but probably fairly limited, just through the District Council's Good Relations programme. Overall, we would welcome TBUC that we needed an updated strategic document in place from Stormont, and are delighted to have finally got that again. And delighted to see the District Council's Good Relations programme continue to be included in that and highlighted as a vehicle, because we feel there's been a lot of good work come out of that. However, we do also think there's things could be improved within that.
Such as?
The key one is the timing of your letters of offer, which usually arrive round about August or September in a given financial year, and the lateness of that prohibits us to strategically plan to actually deliver the stuff that we need to deliver on the ground. That's something that has been raised for about 10 years by district councils, good relations officers, and it's getting worse rather than better.
And I would say, just to add to that, you know, given that we're going into a new dispensation in terms of councils, I think where in the past some local authorities were willing to work at risk, you know, to mitigate against that and to still get the work done, I think given the funding climate that we're all experiencing, that's going to be impacted upon now, and that, you know, work, especially over the summer months where a lot of our, you know, our work is so necessary in dealing with key issues, I think is going to be impacted upon even more so if the letters aren't out in a timely manner.
Okay, noted, yeah.
A further impact of not issuing letters of offer at the start of April. Whether there's a big budget or a small budget, if the letter comes in on the 1st of April, we can strategically prioritise and deliver our work according to local needs over the year. If it doesn't come in then, what you find is in local councils, some good relations officers are put on notice on an annual basis. You then have a reasonably high turnover of staff. You have a drain on the expertise of good relations staff working for local councils. And so it's a vicious circle. It's not improving if people can't stay in the post and stay committed and build their skills. And if we can't work strategically on things like interfaces, flags, parades, marching, those types of issues which come up generally before we receive a letter of offer from Stormont, it is very difficult for us to function effectively, or as effectively as we could.
So timeliness is an issue, okay. I think one of the themes that is emerging for me is the T-Buck shouldn't be out to try and reinvent the wheel. That there's an awful lot of good practice out there already. So to what extent do you believe that your members in NILGA have that expertise and indeed the capacity to deliver T-Buck?
Want to speak first?
Well, certainly in Belfast, we have got very considerable expertise built up over the years. But the frustration that we have, and Sue's alluded to it, is that you build up. This is a long-term project. You've got to get the people on the ground to buy into this change of their thinking. And once you've done that, you've got to be able to deliver something that meets their expectations or satisfies their expectations, and we're not achieving that. So I think we've got a lot of people within City Council, because, and all the councils this must apply to them, because they're right on the ground. They are meeting the people, not quite daily, but very close to daily. Therefore, they can understand what's going on. But they also know that any programme of changing these things is probably a 2 to 3 year programme to get people to change their attitudes, to open a door. And then once you've opened the door, how do you keep the door open for longer? So you cannot go on a hand-to-mouth exercise, as we've been doing. You can do it, but it's very unsatisfactory. And long-term financial planning is one of the keys to the thing.
Okay, I would, in response to do we have the capacity, I think it's important that as ministers you're aware that there's quite a wide variety of how the various local councils apply their good relations practices on the ground. There's a big variation across the councils on that. So it very much depends on a number of things. One will be whether you have staff in the post that have been there for a while, or who have, even if they're new in, have brought relevant experience, or whether they've just arrived in very recently, because there's no doubt that good relations is built on building relations with local communities and understanding the context on the ground. So that's a big issue. The other factor that influences it, in my professional opinion, is how within each district council the managers within the councils react to good relations, whether good relations, proactive, creative, innovative work is encouraged, as it would be in our council, whether it's supported by all political parties, which it is in our local council, so that the officers who are in the posts know that they can go ahead and even take risks and do that type of innovative work and really use their own initiative to work with local communities. We have the capacity in our council, but there's an extreme variation within that across district councils.
We've heard already, I think, on your point, Tom, that this kind of longitudinal approach is very, very important. And we heard some examples, for example, where communities were being brought together and then there was a kind of a seismic shock because an event happened. And I think the example used was the flags protest, and the two communities then immediately sprung back into their own bolt holes. But then, because the work had built up sufficient momentum, people decided, well, actually, we're not going to let this external event put us off. We're going to get back together. So you need that time to be able to get over events, dear boy. The other thing that I'm interested in is does best practice suggest that you don't bring people together by saying to them, look, you're different, so you need to come together and work? Is best practice saying, you've actually got a lot in common? And one of the examples we were given was, you all want to be better parents, so let's get together and talk about how we can be better parents. And you actually don't even mention the fact that you've got a difference.
I would certainly agree with that, and it's like a lot of big change. You've got to sell to your audience what are the benefits of being different. And this applies to anything, that if you're going to create a discomfort for folks, you've got to say to them, well, you know, you could do this, you could do that. Do you realise your job opportunities, for example, are diminished by being beside a peace wall? Now, Ulster University are doing a study on that and hope to produce a report shortly to spell this out. But what we do know from years gone by, that it costs 1.5 billion, or is it 1 billion, doesn't matter which number it is, both are equally valid in keeping us separated. And part of that is the peace walls, part of that is duplicating services and so on. So if you say to people, you've got, let's say 10% of that, 100 million to spend on other things to help you to get jobs, help you to get trained, you can start to say, well, okay, it's a long-term thing, and people, they've laughed at me saying this for years, but I'll keep saying it because it's true, that you've got to keep selling the people the virtues of why a change should happen and get them to say, we want the change, which is doable. And I think that one of the City Council the other evening passed a resolution which is to ask OFMDFM, it might come across your desk at some stage, is what has been the result of breaking down the peace walls? How far? We've gone 3 years or something into this programme of removing peace walls to 2023. Where have we got to in that? Because nobody really knows where we've got to. And the City Council, well, not City Council, has proposed a motion which goes back to one of the committees, but that's what they'll be doing, writing a letter to OFMDFM to say, how much progress have we made? And then the corollary is, what more do we have to do to make it happen faster?
Okay. Just in raising that issue, Tom was saying we don't know how far we've come along in terms of that programme. That makes me wonder, what is the relationship like between good relations officers at council level and the department?
You're doing it.
You've talked about the letters of offer, but more generally, what's the communication flow like?
I think it's reasonably good. We would get good support from the officials in OFMDFM in charge of the programme. Probably could be better in terms of getting good relations officers together to share best practice on a more regular basis. There used to be a sort of 2-day conference now, and then it went down to a 1 day, and now it's a half day. So I think that probably could be better. But in terms of the support from the officials, yeah, I would suggest that it's reasonable. Yeah.
We know them by name. We can lift the phone and ring them. We can email them, and they'll reply back. So.
But the sharing of best practice is an area that is ripe for improvement.
I would have thought so. I mean, I think there's some really good local projects going on, and if it works in one area, it's not to say it'll work in every area, but I think it's certainly worth having a look at it and see if it could be replicated. If it works well. In terms of reasons, bringing people together because they're different, and your original point, I would say no. It's probably that would be best practice to bring them together for a reason rather than just for them being different. I mean. One that we would use all the time in training is Tesco's is bringing everyone together all the time, to do their shopping, but they're actually not interacting. They're turning up at the one place all the time and they're passing each other like ships in the night. But in terms of us, we would bring them together to try and get them to talk, to interact, to communicate, more so than just bringing them together.
The other key point I'd add on that is while I think you need to do both, work on finding common goals and commonalities and also work that looks at differences and explores that constructively, I think the key difference that we've found in Derry Londonderry is that people generally realise that difference is not a threat. The difference can be a positive thing for our city and district, and that has been the key thing. And the most common cited example of that is the Londonderry Bands Forum and the All-Ireland flag.
Okay.
If I could interject, the ladies were talking earlier and I was listening. One of the problems with some of these meetings is that the staff turnover is such that it's new people coming in, new community relations officers and new sort of civil servant folks. So you're starting off from scratch every time. And that's kind of time wasting to some extent, or to a considerable extent. You've got to start building on the existing knowledge and make sure that you keep the teams together.
Okay. I feel compelled to say other supermarkets are available. And at this point, bring in Stephen Woodry.
Thank you, Chair. And you're very welcome here. Actually, it was the point that the Chair just touched on about sharing experiences, and the constituency that I represent encompasses Craigavon and Banbridge, and the issues within the two councils would be very different. But surely there should be a more organised sharing of experiences on a regular basis. Because as you said, I think it was you, Sue, that said it depends on how the senior management in the council, how proactive they are also as to what's fed out at the bottom.
It can do, yes.
Yeah. You know, I'm just making the point that I think, you know, surely sharing of your experiences is beneficial and should be encouraged.
We do in the annual report to OFMDFM, each council is required to list examples of its best practice throughout the year, but that's never been shared across councils to my knowledge. You know, there's useful information sitting there. Genuinely, when CROs need to, they tend to lift the phone to each other and find ideas of best practice, but in terms of formal structures for sharing that, or indeed it's not just within the District Council's Good Relations programme. I mean, our council does considerable programmes with primary and post-primary schools, and you know the Education Board would rarely say let's look at what we're doing, although we would work at a local level with teachers and with people from the Education Board. You know, we're never asked to input into the educational stuff that's in Tabuk, because there's almost an assumption that councils just give out grants, and the whole breadth of what we do is not actually tackled or looked at.
But it would be beneficial.
I think it would, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Chair.
Bronwyn McGann.
Thank you, Chair. There was no community relations funding used for the distribution of grants at Dungannon and South Tyrone Council. So could you tell me what you believe to be the pros and cons of that?
Of giving out Good Relations grant aid?
Yeah.
You want to talk on that or will I? We've tried a number of systems over the year, but grant aid would be a key part of what we do, not so much in terms of workload, in terms of financially. Derry City Council usually gives out around £150,000 in grants. It's a very competitive programme. We can only fund about 50% of the applications that come in, and this year we're going to have to cut that programme quite significantly in the current context. So there's a lot of good projects being turned away, but we have an open and transparent application system, public ad panel scoring it, and we think it's very important.
But I notice here, right, in my own constituency, none of the community relations funding was used in the distribution of grants, sitting at zero. So, you know, obviously it's went somewhere else. So I'm just trying to work out, well, what's the pros and cons of that?
In terms of programme versus grant aid?
Right, okay, yes.
Okay, we have a bit of a balance. There's certainly a merit in putting money out to groups on the ground to identify local needs that meet good relations conditions. However, it's also, we would say, very important that the officers also have programme budgets. We would put money into mainstreaming good relations through Derry City Council services. So we look at good relations through our leisure centres, through sports, through Heritage Museum, all that. We also do a lot of training programmes. If we can see something that we think a lot of people in the community sector would benefit from, like if a load of people need mediation training or media training or whatever it is, then we'll put on courses and run that. Our schools programmes are all part of what we do directly.
I would also say in terms of the grant aid, the pros as well is it's like mainstreaming good relations out through the community associations. They've got the contacts in the community, they've got the relationships with their community, and they can, you know, probably attract a wider audience than perhaps we could. So I do think it definitely is positive in that respect as well, about getting the good relations message out wider than we possibly could.
Just on funding, can I ask, what sort of impact does time-limited funding have on your ability to deliver effectively? So, and what I mean is you maybe apply for and get grants for 12, 18 months, 3 years would probably be the longest you would get it, but the issues are going to be around for a lot longer than that.
at the minute 1 year is the longest that we get funding for under this programme. It's on an annual cycle. We would very much welcome if it could be on a 2 or 3 year cycle. It could make a massive difference in the strategic impact on the ground.
You see, from working in the public sector and the victims side of things a few years ago, it seemed to me what was happening was you would make a case, and if you were successful, you would get funding. You would maybe then go out and employ somebody to deliver a service. And if you were playing snakes and ladders, you would take the people you're serving up a nice ladder to a better place. But then as the funding was running out, and there was uncertainty about whether it would be renewed, maybe your key worker would see a job in the statutory sector, would leave, the programme would collapse, and the people would hit the big snake and actually be worse off because they now know that there was a better place, but the funding wasn't there to get them there. So could funding be open-ended is my question. Once you prove the need, could government say your funding is going to be open-ended? Obviously we're going to monitor it and we want to see impacts, but rather than have you reapply and reapply, we will monitor it, and if we reach a point where we think that the need has been met, we will give you notice that funding will stop.
I think that I can see where you're getting at, and certainly if there was a lump sum of money that was made available to community relations, let's say for a council over a 3 year period, and the council was able to, within that 3 year period, and within each year in that, say, well, these are the programmes that we are going to fund, and they are given the responsibility for using the funds properly, reporting it against whatever the targets are, and making sure that they've got the continuity that you refer to, and also making sure that a point that is very hard to carry out is to cut a programme once you've started it. But they've got to have that responsibility to make sure they cut it. So I think it is doable, but I don't know how government finance would accept a 3 year commitment to £1 million a year to this council, £1 million a year to that council, or whatever.
Well, I mean, we commit to a National Health Service because we know we're going to need acute hospitals and GPs and nurses and all the rest. Sectarianism is not going to be cured in 12 months. So...
Well, we know that, and we treat it actually as much less than 12 months. If you listen to what Sue and Angela talk about, you're given 2 months to do something, because that's the slowness of the process.
Yes, and the letter of offer becomes even more of an issue because it becomes an annual process.
I think it also makes it difficult to, do strategic work or to do progressive work. If you're starting off at a low base with groups and what you would like to do is move it forward and progress it year on year. If you're only getting your letter of offer on an annual basis, it's very difficult to keep that progression going, and to keep those relationships live. It can be difficult.
I would add briefly into that just that district councils do tend to get the flack from other good relations related funding cycles closing and starting. For example, the peace funding. Inevitably, when one round of peace funding closes and there's a 6 or 9 month gap for the next one, then everybody looks to the council to fulfil all that. The IFI Peace Walls programme at the minute, we're hitting the same thing. So, yes.
Okay. Deputy Chair, Crystal.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for your presentation. You're very welcome. Would it be possible to give a brief example of one best practice piece of community relations work?
One. Have you any particular type of work you're interested in?
Maybe something in relation to interfaces, for example.
Do you want to go first on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are a whole lot of exercise going on in Belfast, and I'm not saying it's good practice, but it's a sort of standard practice. That is, you've got to engage with the people. You've got to, as soon as you see a glimmer of people saying we want to be different, you've got to help them and support them in that. And that's happened in Alexandra Park, for example, where okay, there's a great peace wall. It's the only park in the world with a peace wall across it, but they've opened a door in it, and you've got to give them the courage to do it. You put the funding into place. It is done. There is a lot of mischief making outside, saying that they're rioting there every night and that it's a criminal to have opened it up. Well, that's mischief, and that's wrong. And we've tried to stamp that. That actually is coming from some councillors, which appalls me, that they say these things. So the good practice there has been to listen to what the people are saying, to take the idea and say, well, what can we do? What can we do to help you to get there? When they get there, you know there's going to be a problem. And the good practice then is to help them at that problem time. Say, right, what can we do the next step? Okay, maybe you've got to take a step back. That's not a problem, as long as you know you're taking a step back for the right reasons, which is what they had to do. And the City Council worked very, very closely with these folks over time, without putting undue pressure on them. But still saying, your goal is to make Alexandra Park a normal place. I think the other thing that's good is you get people who are prepared to come forward and say, that gate was open. Do you know what it does? It allows me to get to Tesco without having to get a bus or a taxi.
And
I can
other
walk.
supermarkets.
And other supermarkets, yeah.
There are other supermarkets, I realise that. But Tesco needs help.
From a Derry Londonderry perspective, I would say you can't just tackle an interface by just looking at the wall. That's the first key thing. There would be a number of things that we do in relation to that. One, most critically, would be the interface monitoring forum that exists in Derry Londonderry, which on a monthly or bi-monthly basis, as needed, brings together statutory agencies, PSNI, Youth Justice, Council, along with key community workers from either side of all our three interfaces. And we sit around a table and we talk about the issues, and that work has progressed over the years. That literally at the last Midden City Festival celebrations, we find ourselves talking about the fact about where the Portaloos would be in the city, and the police reporting on a carnival atmosphere. Now, if you wind that back 5 or 6 years, that would have been a very different meeting that would have been had. It's long-term building of relationships and sustaining those structures and the relationships that is important. Equally, the IFI Peace Walls programme has made a massive impact in Derry Londonderry because it paid for part-time workers to be based in each of the sides of our interfaces, and having those workers on the ground was critical. Equally, we have a programme on bonfires and alternatives to bonfires, so that communities who have or don't have and are doing away with bonfires can equally benefit. And that brings a lot of our interface communities together on incentive-based training programmes, and helps us also build relationships with them so that they know us if they need to lift the phone. We also put diversionary money. £500 can make a massive difference to a community group or a youth group working either side of an interface, trying to keep young people involved in something positive rather than getting sidetracked into something negative.
I suppose as well in relation to that, around shared spaces and what's considered to be a shared space, we would do very practical things like, get a group of people on a bus and take them into areas physically that they would not normally go into, and just sort of open up the areas to them, make them see that, that they're grand. Like around the UK City of Culture year, where we had a couple of new shared spaces. Well, at the time they wouldn't have been considered to be shared spaces, like Ebrington Site and Guildhall Square, which were part of the public realm scheme. The programming of that year allowed people to go there for a reason, to go to the one big weekend into Ebrington. And now it's considered a totally shared space. So it's about pushing the boundaries of what's seen as shared space and trying to make them more accessible to everybody as well.
You lead me on to a question I'm reluctant to ask, but the T-Book strategy, if I'm not wrong, sets the name of all public space being shared space. What is OFMDFM doing to work with you to ensure that aim is achieved?
Providing money onto the District Council's Good Relations programme so that we can work with local communities.
What way are they monitoring or evaluating the outcomes of that investment to ensure that it's achieving the aims that they've put out in the strategy?
Well, I can comment on how we have to report on that. Every action plan is an outcomes-based action plan now, so you have to look at the target that you're aiming for and then work backwards from that as to what you will do. As to what they do with the information that we send up, I'm not sure, but we do submit quarterly progress reports to OFMDFM, and I don't know if that's collated, but it certainly checks, on an individual basis that the council's doing something constructive.
Okay, and in terms, what does OFMDFM do to bring district good relations officers together to share practice or to consult on ideas?
Well, I suppose they would bring us together on an annual basis in terms of a conference.
Half-day conference, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then if they're, like for example, when the T-Book consultation came out, they would have brought us together in terms of getting our views fed into that, and if there's any other critical pieces of legislation which are pertinent to good relations, then they would bring us together.
Before RPA, the it would have been advised by OFMDFM that we worked in regional groupings, like Derry City Council would have been part of the Northern Forum of Good Relations Officers, along with Coleraine and Ballymoney, Moyle, Limavady. And we would informally have shared good practice in our sort of slightly wider areas then. Those don't really exist as much now because of RPA, but that would have existed before.
Okay. What's a typical budget that OFMDFM gives to a council for good relations work?
There isn't a typical one, unless, well, you may ask them what the average is. How it has been up until now is based on the quality of your work. You submitted a competitive bid and that was scored. If you scored very highly, you tended to get 100% of your funding. If you didn't score highly, you didn't get everything you asked for. Our understanding, and we would have some concerns about this, is that that has changed now, that it's no longer competitive to the same extent, that it's either a pass-fail when we apply this time round under the new council structures, and that the money is not based on quality, as long as you pass, it's based on per capita head. And Derry City Council would have some concerns that in terms of being a more deprived area of Northern Ireland, that disadvantages us, and we would be expecting quite a significant budget hit on that now.
What was your budget for last year, for example?
£500,000.
Okay. And the letters of offer issue, what am I right in saying that August and September was actually an early date of receipt for some of the last financial years?
Probably around average, yes.
I mean, is there instances where that almost halfway through the year until people are actually receiving letters of offer?
Yes.
And that budget is an annual budget? How can anybody operate in those circumstances?
We were operating.
We would
at
be
risk.
delighted if you could help us answer that question.
Okay, that's obviously a serious problem. Right, last question, Chair. Thanks for permitting me. The good relations indicators. What involvement did OFMDFM give to the district councils in terms of setting those good relations indicators, and have you had any update in terms of the outcome of the review?
Do you want to take that away?
Yeah, if you want to call
Certainly, we were asked to send one or two of our representatives down to meetings that were held in Stormont, looking at those indicators, and I know we would have input stuff, about it not being so Belfast-centric, about bearing in mind rural areas, that kind of thing. So we did have input into that. And welcomed that, and I think there were maybe about another 3 or 4 good relations officers from different parts of Northern Ireland that were involved in that process.
And the indicators would have been communicated to us once finalised as well.
Do you think they're in line with the types of outcomes that we're seeking to achieve?
Yes,
there work to
I
be
think
done?
they're very high level for us to be able to measure at a local level without employing researchers, and we tend to do our own consultation and write our own action plans and strategies because that works for the people on the ground. It means we don't spend money on consultants as well. But in terms of if councils were asked to measure those indicators, that's very difficult because it really requires university level type analysis.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. I think that the letter of offer issue is astounding, that when councils are given an annual budget that they only know halfway through the year what they're actually receiving to do that work.
In terms of funding, you've already made clear that when a peace programme wraps up, then pressure comes on you from groups, understandably. What about when a peace programme is open? Is there a tension at that point? And how more generally do you assess the fact you're always looking for this kind of cocktail, as it were, because there's money coming out of the department, there's money coming out of the CRC, there's peace money, there's philanthropy money. How does it work for you?
I suppose in terms of the peace money in the past, we would have ensured that there was complementarity with what we were delivering versus what Peace 3 was delivering. Locally for us it worked very well. We were invited to sit on their partnerships, to attend their meetings, we were asked for expertise in terms of projects when they were establishing, and that it worked very well for us. We're aware of areas where it didn't work so well, where there were issues between both funds, if you like. But for us, it would work pretty well. We would try and ensure that there's always complementarity, and that there's that the good relations, when it's operating well, it's brilliant, and there's loads of money flying about. But when the money starts drying up, and the good work which has been started and initiated under peace, then they want a house for it somewhere, and they tend to look then to the statutory sector in terms of ourselves?
I would just briefly add to that, linking in with the question that Bronwyn McGahan asked earlier, the value of putting money into grant aid versus programmes. With PEACE or another funding programme opens up a lot of money to the community and voluntary sector. Very often the expertise of Council's Good Relations team is called in to sit on steering groups for all those projects. So it adds to our workload, but it also shows the value that you're getting out of having a District Council's Good Relations programme that employs staff.
Okay.
There's always a problem in matching the sources of funds. IFI do one thing, SEUPP do something else. Belfast City Council had a certain amount of money to do something. And one of the problems is that the availability of this funding is never coterminous or starting at the same time. So we've had the odd problem where I say, well, IFI money is there and it's going to do that there. And that is basically helping people, communities to develop. But to develop to what? You need the physical cash to come in later on to do whatever physical work has to be done. And that isn't necessarily available. And you're at odds as to whether you actually take the IFI money to do that, not knowing where the next step is going to be. And it's very important that we always know where the next step is.
So you spend a lot of time chasing money.
Yep.
You spend a lot of time accounting for the use of money, and you probably spend a lot of time shaping your actual strategies to tick the boxes.
In fairness, we also spend a lot of time doing practical and policy work, and we just have quite busy jobs.
Okay, fair enough. Jimmy Smith.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Good to see you, Tom. Just in relation to the community planning, obviously, is going to be a big issue now with councils into the future. And I notice their community engagement, and obviously it's a vital part of engaging with the community in terms of community planning. I noticed that Belfast has done an online survey of residents, and Mid-Ulster has done a series of town hall style meetings in different towns. Is that being run out right across the province in terms of some of the issues that obviously you're dealing with as well? Is Derry City Council doing anything in relation to it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's different approaches being taken to community planning right across the province, but in terms of Derry City Council, Derry City and Strabane District Council, there's the town hall information sessions are being rolled out just last week and this week, right across the district, and I think there's 12 of them. The Chief Executive is leading on those, and with input from consultants, and staff are very much involved in those as well. But it's about, there's a three-pronged approach to it. You know, there's letting the public know about the new dispensation, what, you know, what's going to happen in relation to that. There's the community planning, actual what does that mean for communities, and then how they can impact the new community plan, and how it's going to be shaped and developed, and what it will look like at a local level.
There's a household survey backed up with NISRA of 1,400 households in the area being surveyed, and Section 75 groups and stuff.
So that will play into your work as well?
Some of it will, but not all of it directly, no.
They're employing enumerators locally to do the surveys through ILEX.
Yeah, and through community groups on the ground as well, trained enumerators.
We've heard about the budget issues and all the rest of it. I think that's something that happens right across the board in terms of the problem with only having a yearly budget. Departments and everything else only get a yearly budget, and it's obviously something to do with treasury rules and in local government. Obviously, from a rating point of view, you only get your budget on a yearly basis as well. I mean, Tom, you said NILGA had been doing a good job, and I actually agree with you. I think NILGA over the years have done a very good job in terms of making presentations, and certainly I think they did a good job in terms of the run-up to the legislation for the new councils in lobbying right across the board in terms of all of that. But perhaps it could be stronger, and it could be made stronger in the future in terms of some of these issues around budget, around other issues that in the day-to-day workings of what we have just been talking about. Do you see a major role for NILGA to play in terms of lobbying, if you like, at Stormont here? I mean, they were here on a regular basis in the run-up to the legislation for local government, so how would you see that?
Well, thank you. It's gratifying that somebody else other than the NILGA people are saying we're doing a reasonable job. If you remember or think that Nilga kind of has been going through a transformation for the last few years, and the major issue in front of us all was how are we going to get a coherent view from 26 councils down to 11 councils to get them to work, and how are we going to ensure that government delivers to the councils what it said it was going to deliver, i.e., let's say transfer of functions, rates neutral. Well, that didn't happen, but we were fighting very hard to try and get the councils all to agree what we're trying to take on board and to be willing to take on. Some didn't actually want to take on these responsibilities. So I think that now that in a couple of months' time it will have happened, then yes, I would entirely agree that the councils are now buying more into NILGA. They will be using NILGA as a conduit, and this is why I was quite pleased that this committee invited us here today, because this is another step in putting responsibility on NILGA to come up with coherent views that are persuasive and that the whole of the province, all the councils, can buy into. So that there's one view and that you don't have to go and listen to 26 different people or 11 different people, you're listening to one spokesperson. So I certainly see NILGA expanding its role and its influence.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I'll accept it.
I do think that potentially, on the basis of what you've said so far, there's quite a number of recommendations that might go forward, arising from your evidence in terms of any final report. But I've only got one question, and it is this. Could you sort of scope out, as best you can, given some of the points that you've made about uncertainty of funding and delay in getting firm offers of funding or confirmed offers of funding, could you scope out for us, as you sit now, what do you think the profile is going to be in terms of budgetary pressures, you know, with the rundown of peace, with whatever happens with the IFI interface project monies that you referred to, the budgetary pressures within government and so on. Can you anticipate now what the squeeze could be year on year over the next number of years, let's say, in the life of the current council term? You know, is that too speculative? Because it does seem to me that if we're going to do anything rigorous in terms of our report, we have to be given advice to government about what the financial profile looks like and what the needs might be and what might fall to government in a situation why the Institute of Fiscal Studies today produced a further report that indicated what the further pressures might be in terms of budget generally, including for devolved administrations post 2015-16, and they were very significant. So are you able to sort of, it's not to quite speculate, but give your best assessments about where all this is going to go in terms of what your pressures are going to be?
Well, I'll maybe answer from a speculatively higher level, because I'm not on the ground the way the ladies are. If you were starting to do this as a project, you would spell out what is your end result, what are you trying to get to, and we really, nobody's spelled out just what we're trying to achieve. And indeed what's happening is often what we're saying about a shared future ends up with other people creating things that make it a divided future. Therefore, you've got to get people coherently saying, right, we're going to share the future. Sharing the future means getting rid of peace walls. It means getting out and working with the people on the ground to say, this is how we are going to bring you guys forward so you are comfortable with your neighbour. And then within that, the wonderful saving is sitting there. It's $1 billion a year keeping us separate. Now, how do you fund, let's say, I don't know, $5 million a year? How do we find that? Is there some way that the Minister of Finance could say, right, we can get $5 million a year, and we want to set it aside for the next 5 years, come hell or high water, and that is what is going to be spread over the province to do things. Then you go to the 11 councils and say, look, you've got that issue there, and I'm sure there's somebody who's already done the research to see where the major pressure points are, but if you're talking about the areas of deprivation, and I heard the other day, ISIS comes from deprivation. Now, I don't want there to be an ISIS here in Northern Ireland. You've got to address the issues of those deprived areas. And that there brings in social involvement, economic involvement, and a whole heap of other things. So somebody's got to start to think their way through that and say, right, how much money do we need? But if you're only given a few million quid, you then say, how am I going to spend that? Now, the pressure is going to come on the people who are on the coalface, and that's Angela and Sue. They maybe, if you're to cut their budgets by 50%, which is, or 20%, they will have to juggle with that and carry on doing what you're doing. And maybe you'd like to expand on that.
Maybe if I start, and if you want to add in. The first thing I would say is we've already had these conversations. I mean, we lost 18% of our budget when we were told at the start of September this year. So our key message to you, which we've articulated before, tell us what our budget is on the 1st of April, because then whatever the budget is, we will try to work with that and we're able to strategically plan. One thing is that our style of working may change, whereas communities can come to council, they work in partnership to look for grant aid. We may be saying to them very soon, we have no money at all, however, let me come out and work with your community group at this interface or in that housing estate area or in that sports club, and we work with them in kind and we help them fill in forms to get funding from Comic Relief, Children in Need, wherever we can get it, and we're already doing some of that. So if we have less money directly ourselves, then our resource as people who understand good relations effectively on the ground becomes even more important. So that's the key thing. The other thing, say we already work on a shoestring budget. If you look at the money that goes into things like Piece 3, the scale of the funding that is given out there by far just puts ours into perspective as we work on a shoestring delivering projects. So to cut that further means effectively, in terms of our direct delivery under our action plan, either you cut all of our grant aid or you cut all of our other programmes that we deliver, our training, our schools programmes, our community festivals, our black and minority ethnic work, our interface diversion fund, that could all go, or you halve both of those and try and have some kind of a balance. But that's how significant the funding cuts are. We don't know coming this financial year whether we will have any money to spend after we have given out grant aid. We don't know if we'll have any programmes money at all for our officers to work from. That's the worst case scenario, but it's not impossible. So we're already looking at those kind of things.
The other thing to say is that, you know, we're hearing that Piece 4 is perhaps in the pipeline, and, you know, that maybe will relieve the pressure. Although there is going to be a significant gap in relation to that. AFA is done, it's gone, and the only other thing would be any other philanthropic funding out there, but yeah, as Sue has stated, it's scary.
Another key impact of those other funders going out of existence is the people who are employed in community and voluntary sector jobs end up not having those jobs. And I can't stress how important those jobs are in our sector. Derry City Council Good Relations team couldn't do half the work we do if we didn't have people on the ground in communities that we can work with. Because over-reliance on volunteers and people trying to juggle family and work and doing all this, it's impossible for them to do. So if you take our city and district and say it has moved forward, part of that is because we have a very progressive community and voluntary sector that is willing to engage with these issues and work with us on it. If they go, you know, we're handcuffed in what we can do.
Okay, so I think you mentioned NISRA at one point. So the final question is about NISRA's evaluation of District Council Good Relations Programme. I think it was completed in 2012, but the recommendations have not been implemented. Is that?
That would be my understanding of it, yes.
Have you any knowledge of when they may be implementing the recommendations?
No, I haven't, but I know some of the key points, like the timeliness of the letters of offer and things like that, were raised then, and we would love to see many of those recommendations being looked at.
Okay. Well, I think that has been most useful. Thank you very much indeed. Still feeling bad about the supermarkets. I'm going to say clearly from what you're saying, Sue, a Lidl goes a long way,
Yes.
but we're not yet at the point where we can ask,
Every penny
has the
counts.
programme worked? So Sue, Angela and Alderman Tom, thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman and members.
and we look forward to sparring with you in the future.
Should say now, Chair, we'll be back after this short break.
That's right. The weather's next.
He misses it.
I've just had an image of Frank Mitchell and not well. Members, on the issue of the NISRA report, which was 2012, would you be content that we write to OFMDFM and ask if the department, first of all, has accepted the recommendations in that evaluation of District Council's Good Relations Programme, and if so, when the recommendations might be implemented?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Our second briefing is next, members, from NILGA, this time focusing on community planning. Clark's brief again, page 89, is relevant to this section, and again, NILGA's briefing, page 98, begins their thoughts on community planning. So, Karen Smith is Head of Policy at NILGA. Jackie Patton is Council Officer for Mid and East Antrim, one of the new super councils. Mary Kerr, Housing Policy and Research Manager for the Northern Ireland Federation of Housing Associations. Mary, Jackie, Karen, you're all very welcome. Karen, I see you're in the middle, so are you opening?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to thank the committee for the invitation to attend today again, and for your interest in community planning. This is obviously very new to Northern Ireland, and councils are currently making the necessary practical arrangements to do all they can to ensure that community planning is successful here. I've provided you with some background information in your briefing, and would like to take a brief opportunity to expand on some points. I would say that although the primary legislation is in place for community planning, there are some subordinate legislation and statutory guidance that we're still waiting on to enable councils and their community planning partners to move forward with more certainty. A consultation about statutory partners closed on the 12th of December, and we're in the process of responding to a consultation on statutory guidance, which closes on the 9th of March. In November, councils and a number of relevant organisations were given a brief opportunity to comment on the draft guidance as part of a pre-consultation exercise, and one of the issues arising from that pre-consultation was an awareness of weakness in the document surrounding equality and good relations, which was addressed to prior to publication of the finalised consultation. We know that DOE officials were in contact with the Committee for Administration of Justice, the Community Relations Council, the Equality Commission, and actually OFMDFM to explore that issue and to assist in developing the guidance in that regard. It might be useful for the committee to examine the consultation as it stands at present, to assess whether you wish to make any suggestions as to content. And I know that other Assembly committees are keeping a close eye on the progress of community planning to ensure that they're aware of the opportunities it presents and have requested sight of that draft guidance document. I'd also suggest that the committee encourages the department to liaise with the DOE Local Government Division to establish whether that they should send an attendee to the DOE Community Planning Working Group, which is meeting on a regular basis. I know that DOE are looking at strengthening links with departments that aren't transferring functions within local government reform, and I would respectfully suggest that, given OFMDFM's remit for equality and good relations, that they should engage with the work at that level. New councils have recently appointed community planning officers, such as Jackie, who are working closely with NISRA in what is a phase of building an evidence base for decisions that will need to be taken after the 1st of April 2015. And I've also requested that Mary Kerr from the Northern Ireland Strategic Migration Partnership join us today, as this partnership, which also includes councillor members, has been very active in assisting in the evidence building exercise and has produced a document focusing on community profiles for the new local government districts, and particularly in relation to migrants. This community profiles document, which I think you've got the summary of at the start, it's designed to support councils and their partners to engage with, plan for and deliver to communities that are becoming much more diverse, and hopefully to assist us all to maximise the potential within our communities. And I've got a copy of the full document for the Chair, should you so wish to have a look at it. And we're happy to take any questions.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. That was most useful. In your briefing paper, you talked about the political partnership panel,
yes,
which was set up and met in December, and actually, I think, was due to meet for the second time yesterday.
It did, yes.
So how did that go?
It went very well by all reports. There were 5 of the executive ministers there. Minister Hamilton was attending, and there was obviously a huge desire on behalf of council members to have a discussion about finance, and also to begin discussions on community planning, and also to develop a work programme for that partnership panel.
So, do you know the other 4 ministers who attended?
Off the top of my head, Minister Durkin obviously chaired the meeting. We had Minister Wells, Minister Story, and there was one other, and I'm trying to remember who it was. None of the OFMDFM ministers were attending.
Okay, but...
obviously Minister Hamilton would be the other one, sorry.
Yeah, in terms of then the potential, you think it has the potential to be a very useful...
We have a lot of hope for it,
tool.
Chair, and certainly indications are good at the moment. Obviously it will... it needs to show results quick. We need some quick wins from it, and certainly already we've managed to have a good outcome in relation to a problem that we had with that the sector had with the Code of Conduct, and the fact that it was too onerous on members and was actually anti-democratic in some ways, and limiting their ability to speak about things. So it's early days, and we anticipate that actually it will become substantive over the time, particularly in the run-up to the next programme for government, and we would like to see a complementarity between what local government's doing and what central government's doing.
If you read the Smith Commission on post the Scottish independence vote, or indeed the command paper on further devolution for the English regions that's come out of Westminster, you can see a sort of consistent direction of travel that says power should be devolved away from Westminster, out of Edinburgh, out of Cardiff, out of Belfast, down to council and community level. Would you agree that, you know, perhaps the best thing for Stormont to do is to set the vision, which might be a shared future, but then to devolve the actual mechanisms for delivering it to councils, because how you might deliver it in Larne may be different from how you're going to do it in Dungiven. Might be different from how you do it in East Belfast, and indeed how you do it maybe on the lower Newton Arts Road might be different from how you want to do it on the upper Newton Arts Road.
I would certainly agree with that way of the direction of travel, and certainly community engagement, as has already been highlighted, is a fundamentally important part of the new community planning process. We are looking with voluntary and community sector partners as to how to actually build their capacity, as well as build the capacity of our elected members and our staff within councils to get things working the way they should be working, and to normalise the situation here, and to deliver that shared future would be an important part of what we're trying to achieve. Jackie, if I could bring Jackie in, was a good relations officer in Ballymena for a long time, and has now transferred across to community planning, so this is very much her area of work.
Indeed, Chairman, thank you, and thank you to the committee for the invitation to be here today. Yes, I worked for Ballymena Council since 1991 as a good relations officer, so quite a while, and I've taken the opportunity to work now for Mid and East Antrim in terms of community planning on a secondment basis. In terms of all this area of work, in my experience would say it's all about civic leadership. It's about making sure that we have key people at the head of all of these organisations. We're very fortunate in Mid and East Antrim that we have an excellent chief executive who's very behind good relations and also planning, and that's Anne Donaghy, together with our senior management team and also our councillors. As I've said before, I think with Sue, I mean, I've worked very closely with Sue and Angela over the years, it's about relationship building. Making sure that we have those relationships. I mean, a lot of the talk today was in terms of grants. Ballymena Borough Council, our grant aid was something like £10,000 per year, £300 per group. Now, it was a competitive process, but it was only £300. But the amount of work that there could do, and again, it was about the staff getting involved in those, the committees at grassroots level. I mean, within our borough in Ballymena, we had Harryville, we have Brasheen, we had a vibrant ethnic minority population that we worked with in the early 2000s in terms of creating an interethnic forum that now has gone from strength to strength. You'll agree with that. I'm sure, David, you come to an awful lot of our events, and we're very fortunate for that. So again, this work it's time-bound. It's grasping the opportunities that you have at those times in terms of the peace fund, in terms of the opportunities that we have, but a lot of us in terms of people working together and having a great capacity in terms of the area, and I think the area that I represent has been very fortunate that we certainly have that.
I think just to build on that, sort of to go back to your point, the ability of local government to work locally, and Tom was very clear on that sort of ground-up approach, a bottom-up approach. I mean, it's incredibly important, and I think that although we need to have that strategy set at central level, I think that needs to be fed by what's happening at ground level as well. So that reciprocal relationship will be incredibly important and can be worked out through the community planning process and through the partnership panel as well, hopefully, eventually.
No, totally.
Mary, can I bring you in, because your role is policy and research with regard to housing. So what sort of patterns?
It is. If I could just clarify, I'm with the Northern Ireland Strategic Migration Partnership. Yes, sorry, whenever you introduced me as having responsibility for housing, I was just getting installed and I thought I misheard.
Sorry, that's the error is on our side, so I withdraw that question. So, sorry, just repeat again, what is your function?
I'm with the Northern Ireland Strategic Migration Partnership. I'm policy officer there. So we're one of 11 partnerships across the UK funded by the Home Office.
Okay. And how well understood do you think your area is at local government level?
In local government area, I think it's becoming more well understood. To date, we've been working very much at a regional level. We're relatively recently established partnership. We've been in place for about 3 years, but no, I think this issue is coming more and more to the fore in local government, particularly with regard to the new functions of community planning and bringing governance closer to the people, and a recognition that the people is actually a much more diverse representation than it had been previously, which is why we really developed these profiles, because we were I was saying we were working at the regional level. We realised there was a need to work more at local government level, and initial conversations with principally good relations officers on this were saying we just don't have data, we don't know what our demographics are, which is why then we developed the profiles for each of the new 11 councils, just to show them exactly, well, who is within your government boundaries, what kind of diversity do you have, what languages are spoken, what is the various pressures being put on, or possible pressures on different services, etc. So it'll inform them going forward with not just with the engagement aspect of community planning, but also in terms of the content that they are serving the full diversity of their population.
Karen, do you think there's a common understanding of what the term community planning means amongst councillors?
No. I don't think there's a particularly strong understanding across a number of sectors about what community planning means. I think there's a different understanding between different departments about what community planning means, and I think that's why the guidance is so important, because we've got a legislative definition, but how that's actually worked out in practice is going to take some time. We have at least a year and hopefully 2 years to get the first iteration of community plans up and running. And during that time, that understanding of what community planning means at a local area will need to develop. And I say that deliberately, because actually what community planning might look like in Mid and East Antrim might be different to what it looks like in Belfast. There is some flexibility within the guidance as to the outworkings of it, whether there's an area-based approach, whether there's an approach based on strategic themes, or whether there's a combination of the two. And that's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be local, but it has to be within the strategic setting of the programme for government, and that local government response and complementarity to the programme for government.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. Deputy Chair, Chris Little.
I just wanted to ask in relation to the political partnership panel what the sort of makeup of it is. My understanding is it has local government reps from each of the 11 councils, NILGA reps and executive ministers. What sort of representation from local councils is on that panel?
At the present time, we have, I don't have the exact political makeup of that with me, and I can furnish the staff with that later on this afternoon. But certainly there is a good cross-section of political parties across the panel. We have one representative, obviously, from each of the 11 councils, and there are up to 5 representatives from NILGA. And the key function, really, apart from the sort of strategic consensus building that NILGA does, is actually to make sure that that political balance is provided, because we know the importance that the importance of making sure that smaller parties and quieter voices are actually represented at that table. So the balance issue was an important one, which is why we're on the panel in the first place.
It's helpful. I'm just wondering how Assembly MLAs or committees stay up to date with the work of the panel, given it seems to be the one area of representation that isn't covered on it. It seems like a useful framework to try and lead on issues.
Sorry to cut across you, Chair. If I can just maybe as you have already stated, it's very, very early days for the panel. It's working out what it is and what it's going to do, and also councils, the new councils are becoming operational obviously on the 1st of April. Most of them are having an AGM in March, and the representation on that panel will probably change after that. Now, that may have the effect of markedly changing the political representation on it, because people may have cottoned on to how important it's going to be, and that may impact on which parties actually prioritise it as a position of responsibility.
Okay. This could be finally. If you were doing a sort of SWOT analysis of community planning and its ability to deliver the TBUC policy, what would the strengths and weaknesses and the opportunities and the threats be?
I think the strengths would be bringing key players together and being able to work on themes or work on specific areas. We have weaknesses in that we're not particularly happy at the moment with how the departments are tied into the process, and because the departments are setting the policy and strategy, and this is all departments, trying to make sure that their feet are under the table, specifically the departments that have service delivery arms. We're still trying to tease that out, and certainly the Minister is working quite hard to make sure that statutory partners legislation is written in such a way that they are fully tied in. Opportunities, I mean, Jackie can maybe come in on sort of the opportunities that she sees at local level, but certainly we see that we're a bit worried it's going to be, or people are going to perceive it as some sort of panacea or magic wand that it's going to solve everybody's problems. Specifically, we're having an issue in possibly managing the expectations of the community and voluntary sector, but actually it has an opportunity to completely change how local government operates and how Northern Ireland operates and how the community operates, and it's if it works, it should be quite successful. So
I think, notwithstanding those weaknesses, certainly within the structure that Anne Donachie is purporting in Mid and East Antrim, we have a specific community planning department, a directorate with a specific director, and Good Relations is going to sit under that department. So that is very, very welcome, so it is. Because as Sue was saying earlier, it's the case in certain councils that perhaps Good Relations wasn't necessarily to the fore that perhaps it should have been. So certainly I welcome that very much, as being a Good Relations officer myself for so many years. Other things, for example, in Mid and East Antrim, we were just at the start of the process in terms of engaging with our statutory partners and also with the community engagement aspect. Currently we're working to the foundation programmes themes, and one of those, as you'll be aware, is safety and good relations. So I would assume, I'd be very surprised that safety and good relations is not one of those key themes. So certainly I think it's auguring well in terms of opportunities. It's good to get it out there. It's good to have this community consultation whereby, you know, a sixth of the themes that we'll be looking at will be very specific to safety and good relations. Another aspect too, certainly in an operational point of view, would be from example of the PCSPs. Now, whenever I worked in Ballymena Council, I worked closely with the officers there in terms of community safety and the DPPs, but not necessarily a seat at the table in terms of, so I welcome that opportunity in terms of it's almost going to be more joined up, hopefully, in terms of it. Should also say it's very early days. I mean, I've only been in post since October time. This is obviously new for all of the councils. So I think it's taken that time at this point in terms of trying to set up the structures as best we can, but realise that we will make mistakes and try to learn from those. you know, as we move forward. But certainly I welcome the opportunity very much in terms of good relations. Again, it's good from the point of view that it is well referenced in the statutory guidance. I think that is certainly to be welcomed. One area perhaps that could be enhanced is around the race relations, and perhaps maybe Mary would want to speak just a little bit that in terms of the statutory guidance.
Yeah, I think in terms of the racial equality strategy is forthcoming, and we welcome that. We look forward to seeing the final document. In terms of that interface between how can community planning help deliver TBOC, TBOC I think is a very strong strategy in terms of its vision. When it's broken down to the implementation side and down to the project, it becomes less of an inclusive document and more of an exclusive document. It goes back to the two-community model, while when it sets out its vision, it's very much, you know, a very inclusive model. I would perceive that as a possible weakness when we're looking at promoting good race relations, looking at community planning as a vehicle for that, if the emphasis in TBOC is still within looking at one particular fault line within the community and at the expense of another lesser fault line, possibly at the minute, but is growing and has the potential that if it's not addressed now, then 10 years down the line will have there'll be greater need has built up there. So I think it's very important to coordinate those documents and to spell out really how is the racial equality strategy, how is it going to coordinate with TBOC, and how are they both going to be supportive of and be supported by community planning.
Out on the ground, is the strategy, the racial equality strategy, missed?
Yes, I think it's very ad hoc in terms of people are firefighting a lot. The organisations that are working actually, you know, on the ground, very client facing. We work in a very strategic kind of area, but we would talk a lot to organisations have much more of an operational role, and they really do feel that there is a lack of strategic direction, and they are very much looking forward to the racial equality strategy, and that the gap where the racial equality strategy hasn't been there has been filled by community groups really working to their capacity and beyond. And I think what has happened, there's a lot of coordination among the community and voluntary sector, because these gaps have been there that have had to have been filled, and with the absence of a strategy, it fell back to that sector to do a lot more than because there was no overarching framework for them to work within.
So is there a danger, Mary, that actually the strategy could become obsolete because people have had to make decisions about how to actually live their lives, and, for example, the TBOC strategy may shape the way relationships are before the strategy comes out?
Well, we would hope that the strategy will be informed by the consultation responses, and that the strategy isn't going to just take up where the previous strategy left off, but will acknowledge how groups and organisations have moved forward and how relationships have developed. So, I mean, we understand that the final strategy will be available by the end of this financial year. So we would hope that it would be acknowledge the work that's done in TBOC. TBOC acknowledges that there is a racial equality strategy and that the two will be working together, but it doesn't actually spell out how that's going to happen. The indicators, the good relations indicators certainly are very much focused on the two community model, and there does seem to be, well, you know, without seeing the racial equality strategy and how that's going to be measured and how these indicators are going to be brought together, it's very difficult to say how the two strategies will work together. But because there is an acknowledgement in both that there is a need to, we just need that spelt out a little bit more.
The 18th of March is a key date for this committee in terms of that strategy, because that's when we're due to have a briefing. One would like to think that indicates the policy is about to go to the printers. But
Chair, if I could just maybe come back on a more general point, that it's really back to something that Alderman Nickett said earlier on about really having a conversation and looking at looking closely at what we want to achieve, what we want the outcomes of all this to be. I think if you look at the programme for government for Scotland, Scotland Performs, I've seen it, they can get their entire programme for government in 2 sides of A4 because they're very tight outcomes that everybody's working towards, councils are working towards, and the Scottish Government is working towards. And I think that is the way we want to go. And I think community planning and TBUC and all the strategies working together should be feeding into a document like that so that everybody's clear, the whole region's clear about what we want to achieve.
So that's the Scottish Government's programme for government, 2 pages.
Well, the summary of it is on 2 sides A4.
I like the style.
Chair, can I just ask, I mean, what has NILGA done to try and lobby in terms of trying to put the point that you've just made to OFMDFM or whatever? I mean, that's part of your job is to lobby. What have you done?
Of course, and
you know, it's easy to say what you've said.
Yes,
but tell me what you've done or what you intend to do.
Well, I know through the chair, I know that our chief executive has met with the ministers from OFMDFM, and we do lobby. We've developed a programme for local government that has been put around all the relevant departments that is designed to be complementary to the forthcoming programme for government and to inform the forthcoming programme for government. That is also taking on board something that the chair said earlier on about, you know, potentially further devolution and taking on further functions once political confidence has been built up in the transfer of the functions that will be taken on. We're at a very difficult time in relation to NILGA and relation to local government. NILGA at the moment is in the process of reconstituting. So we're in a slightly weakened position, which is why there isn't an elected member with me in this session today. We are in the process of consulting with the 11 councils as to their engagement over the next period of time and funding mechanisms and membership and new constitutions and so forth. And that has not come to a resolution as yet. So we are continuing to negotiate with on some thorny issues with some of them. But we certainly hope and have got strong support from all of them as far as I can see to continue, particularly on the lobbying role, particularly on the consensus building role. It's more sort of financial issues that I should have said that we're working on. But what that does mean is that because at the moment the way we are constituted, we represent the 26. And we need to develop the constitution and the membership to represent the 11. So we're kind of in between 2 stools at the moment. And very, very shortly we will be beginning a much more concerted effort to lobby along those lines, along finance lines, local government finance, strategic policy. And we have support actually from the 11 councils to do that. But we're sort of maintaining, or we're doing what we can to support them in advance of their eventual sign-up.
But you've just made a statement to the committee to say that Chief Executive lobbied OFMDFM ministers. Was that the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister, or was it the junior ministers? When did that lobby take place?
Well, there have been...
Sorry, just let me finish. And what was the lobby about?
I would need to go back to the office to get the details of the visits. There have, as far as I understand, there have been a number of visits. I know that we've had contact with officials about various aspects of OFMDFM's work, and it would be more on, I suppose, on the economic policy side and programme for government side. And I wouldn't want to say, I know the Chief Executive led on some of those visits, but there may have been visits with members as well. I just don't have the detail of that at the moment, but I can certainly furnish the committee.
You specifically told in evidence a short time ago,
yes.
You said, and it will be on the record
yes.
and answered, that the Chief Executive met with OFMDFM ministers.
As far as I'm aware.
So you're not sure?
No, I'm
you
not.
made a statement and you're not sure now?
I'm not 100% sure, but I'm fairly sure that he's met with at least one of the junior ministers.
So you're retracting the first statement you made?
If that has caused confusion, yes.
Well, it's not causing confusion, but we need to get it clear. You know, you can't make a statement and say you've had meetings, and I want to know then what those meetings were about, and on what issues did the Chief Executive lobby. So perhaps, Chair, we can get a letter back from NILGA, from the Chief Executive, to tell us exactly when those meetings took place, what the lobbies were about, if the meetings took place, so that we're clear.
Okay.
I think that's agreed. Yeah, Karen, you're content with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Jackie, Mary and Karen, thank you very much indeed. And Mary, again, apologies for the confusion.
It's grand.
It's
It's nice to have another hat.
And clearly we shall give some thought to how we keep abreast of the political partnership panel, which may be the key in this area.
Cheers, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Okay. Okay, members, we now move on to matters European. We've got a response to our report on the Barroso Task Force. We also look at the Executive's EU priorities. I alert you to the cover note from the clerk at page 189. There's some overlap between the two areas, so I think it might be best we take a reasonably themed approach. In terms of other papers, at page 193, you've got the Department response to the recommendations in the Barroso Task Force report and some follow-up information. Then the implementation report for the Executive's priorities for 2013-14 is at page 205. Page 241 are the EU priorities for financial year 14-15. A mid-year progress report of 14-15 is at page 255. Programme for Government Commitment 26, Year 3 drawdown tables are in table papers at page 26. Information on the drawdown on research and development funding for the health sector is again in table papers at page 29. And finally, the Northern Ireland Executive Office in Brussels Director's Report is again in table papers at page 32. So we welcome Paul Geddes and Jerry Mulligan. Jerry, would you like to make some opening remarks?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to bring the committee up to speed on a number of issues of interest. We have circulated 3 reports in advance of today's hearing. The first of which is the OFMDFM response to the committee's inquiry into the Barroso Task Force. The second is the progress report against the Executive's European priorities for 14-15, covering the first 6 months of that period. And the third report is my own director's report, which is the first time that report has been sent to this committee. It originally was a report that was commissioned by ministers, but I felt that given the wider interest and the wider audience for the information that's in it, with ministers' approval, I forwarded to this committee as well. So hopefully, Chair, you'll have found that report to be interesting. It is part of a wider strategy for improving our communication, something that was prompted by this committee and its inquiry. So it sits alongside a number of databases that we've been developing to create awareness of funding opportunities, of events in Brussels and in other European cities. And also under development is a database on information about regional offices and regions in Europe. And the other element, which is relatively new, of our communications strategy is our Twitter account. We recently launched a Twitter account which provides access via Twitter to a lot of this information that we're producing. So, on policy matters, Chair.
What's the Twitter handle or account? What is the account?
Oh, it's at Brussels NI.
Good job.
And I'm pleased to report that we have over 300 followers.
Are any of them on this side of the table, this side of the table, or this end of the table?
Not yet.
I think we've got we're represented both sides of the table at the moment in our followers.
How many followers are sitting at the table?
I can't answer that question, Chair.
That's a bit unfair, Chair. Are you a member?
No, I'm not. No,
But I would
didn't know you had it.
encourage all of the members
I
around
want
the
to know if
table.
the answer is at least 2.
Well, certainly I know that.
Are you following it, Jerry?
Oh, absolutely.
And Paul? Are you following it?
It's one of my main sources of information.
Paul, are you following it?
I'm not following it. Primarily because the department has a policy on access at times, and also I have the inside track on a lot of the
Good
material.
answer.
Right. Well, rest assured, Chair, that there will be an increase of followers following today's
Oh,
hearing
yes, absolutely.
of at least one.
No, count me in.
But
Sounded like a direct order, did it?
on policy matters, Chair, we're now entering the Latvian presidency. They'll hold the presidency of the Council for the next 6 months. And you could describe this particular presidency as the first settled presidency within the current mandate, because during the previous 6 months, a lot of time was devoted to getting agreement on the commissioners, the College of Commissioners, on publication of the work programme and so on. So now that we have the College's published work programme, we also have the College up and running with agreed mandates and portfolios for the commissioners, and the European Parliament's committees are up and running as well. So I think Latvia now takes forward presidency that is substantive. Its 3 high-level priorities are creating competitive Europe, a digital Europe, and an engaged Europe. But it has made it clear that it intends to progress 2 particularly important initiatives. One is what's referred to as TTIP, the trade negotiations with the USA, and the other is the President Juncker's investment initiative, which aims to lever in significant real money into the real economy, around 315 billion of investment. So those are 2 areas, 2 issues, 2 policies that the Latvian presidency wants to progress during its six months tenure. I'm happy to take questions, Chair, on any of the reports or any of the issues that have been raised.
Thank you. Could we start with TTIP? You'll be aware that there is concern, and indeed there's a lobby group which is very concerned that the National Health Service is a threat under TTIP with contracting out to the private sector. Now, I'm aware that Commissioner Almstrom issued a letter, I think, in the last 48 hours, which gives the clearest indication yet that the NHS will be excluded from TTIP. But what's your understanding?
That is also my understanding, Chair, that after concerns expressed about the potential adverse effects on health services in particular, the Commission has now confirmed that it is out with the negotiations. The negotiating mandate was agreed during the Irish presidency, and it covered 3 areas. It was competition rules, cooperation in regulation, and access to markets. Now, yes, access to markets would include public services, but that has now been confirmed by the Commission as an area that will not be adversely affected.
Okay, I think it's useful to make that point. You have a Twitter feed. There's some criticism there's no new website for the office in Brussels.
We have been in discussions with our colleagues in the department who are responsible for the management of the department's website, and they have encouraged us to develop our new website in the office to coincide with the development of an upgrading of the department's website. So rather than do our own thing, we are in discussions with our colleagues in the Executive Information Service about upgrading in the context of the wider upgrade.
Okay. Issue of timeliness comes up time and again, Jerry, and particularly with reference to delays, that engagement is not done in a timely manner, and from our own point of view, it impacts on our ability to scrutinise, and make the point all the time, scrutiny does not correlate to criticism. Scrutiny could be praised because things are going well.
Well, again, we've taken on board the committee's concerns and previous criticisms, and we have outlined a much more ambitious timescale for providing the committee with the documents that it needs. And I would invite Paul maybe to comment on the next executive priorities and the timescale that we are aiming to work to for that document, because it's obviously central to the committee's concerns.
Just before you know, I think we have to acknowledge that there was an EU priorities document for 14-15, and there's also a mid-year progress report on those 14-15 priorities.
That's right.
But the mid-term progress report came to us before we got the priorities. So we got a mid-term update on something that we hadn't been told about.
Right.
I think that reflects the fact, Chairman, that although there was not formal agreement on the executive's priorities at that stage, that departments were still continuing to work and implement material on the ground, which meant that we could develop the implementation plan. It is true that the sequencing was incorrect, but that was an internal foible. So in actual fact, the priorities had been submitted for clearance prior to the mid-year report, but there was an inversion there. But the two followed each other very closely.
Which they shouldn't.
It should. Yes,
they should be separated by 6 months.
Yeah. I would accept that.
In the ideal world.
I would accept that, Chair. And you will see with the timetable that Paul will outline that the correct sequencing will be followed for the current priorities and implementation plans.
I mean, given that within the last hour we had people sitting in your seat saying that one of the difficulties they have in terms of Derry City Council is that letters of offer come mid-year. There has to be a suspicion that there's a systemic problem. But I don't ask you to answer that, but I just have to make the point, because the two presentations are highlighting a similar issue. But anyway, Paul, sorry, I interrupted you.
Yes, well, thank you, Chairman. The committee may recall that when the report was prepared and debated in the Assembly, the Junior Minister Bell had responded and gave a commitment at that stage in the Chamber to accelerate the compilation of a set of strategic priorities for the Executive Committee, and subsequently, when the Department formally responded, we had put that commitment further in writing from ministers. The situation we're at the minute is that we hope to arrange the publication of the priorities by the end of April, and we hope to provide the committee with a draft for consultation and comment by the end of this month. The Interdepartmental Committee will consider a first cut draft on the 18th of this month. So that's a considerably expanded implementation timeframe. In fact, I would suggest the timeframe is for 4 months from start to finish.
Okay. Communication, which I suppose goes with engagement, does seem to be an issue. It's been put to me that there's a kind of wait to be asked culture. Do you think that's fair?
Well, again, we've taken on board the committee's recommendation about the need to improve the communication with stakeholders, and I think I would invite the committee to look at what has been achieved in a relatively short period of time since the recommendation. We have, on a monthly basis now, circulated information on funding opportunities, comprehensive information to a wide group of stakeholders. We have a database on events, again, it's comprehensive. So I would think that the gaps that were previously the source of that criticism have now been filled, Chair. And certainly the feedback we're getting from stakeholders is very positive.
Okay, your priorities has a C1, provide timely and accurate advice to ministers in the Assembly on European policy and funding programmes. Are you confident that that's happening? How would you evidence how that is being delivered?
Well, we would certainly we now have the information.
Just come back in 2 minutes.
We're not court even to listen.
Listening?
No. Sorry. That's sorry, Jerry.
Okay. No, we certainly have within the current staffing arrangements in the office a number of dedicated officials dealing with specific areas, and they are tasked with delivering on that objective and making sure that both our ministers and departmental ministers are aware of key policy developments. So we will continue to horizon scan and make our ministers aware of both upcoming regulations and upcoming policy that will be of significance to the region. So we have the staff in place. It's built into their objectives that they have to provide timely information to ministers and stakeholders. And again, I think that the output of the databases that we refer to, in that it's seen simultaneously by this committee, by ministers and by stakeholders, represents a significant improvement in the timeliness of information coming from the office and the division.
C1.2 states all departments are to provide departmental committees with a summary of all EU proposals impacting the department twice yearly. Is that actually happening? It's been put to me it isn't.
As far as I am aware, Chairman, departments have told us that it is happening.
So do you get, that would suggest you don't get copied in on these?
That is correct, Chairman. We don't get copied in. But it's the responsibility of each department to inform both their ministers and their assembly committees as appropriate. So it's somewhat beyond OFMDFM's remit on that. But they have given a commitment, and the commitment has been signed off by the executive committee. So we would expect that to be honoured. And we will also expect that section to be updated accurately once we get to the end of this financial year, when the full year implementation report is prepared.
Right, but you give it a green in the RAG status in your mid-term review.
Well,
but you have no evidence to back that up.
Well, we will issue the document to the relevant officials in departments, and their inputs are cleared through their private offices. So under that process, we will accept what they tell us. We do not have a policing role in this term.
If I said to you the Justice Committee is the only one that has confirmed that the twice yearly reports are being received, what implications would that have for the RAG indicator?
It would indicate, if that is the evidence, Chairman, that the RAG indicator has been overstated and will need to be revised.
To which colour?
It would certainly need to come down to amber and potentially red.
I would have thought. It's only one department. It would be very clearly red.
Certainly, Chair, in the light of what you've said, we would intend to follow up on the classification of that particular action.
It's my understanding, and I would be given. It would be good if I were wrong. I would be pleased to be.
Okay. We can certainly follow up on that, Chair.
Okay. C3.13 is a target for OFMDFM. Delivery of a twice-yearly brief on dossiers of Northern Ireland interest covering significant issues of importance to relevant parties. And a progress report that states initial dossier issued June 2014 to be updated December 14, received by NI, MEPs and other relevant parties. Who are the other relevants?
The recipients of the brief at this point in time would be MEPs only. Now, I would suggest that there might be wider interest in that document as well, Chair, and I would be happy to follow up on the potential wider circulation of that particular document.
Okay, and is it possible for this committee to receive this dossier at the same time as the MEPs?
I could certainly request through our ministers that the document is given wider circulation.
Is there an issue with the capacity building fund? Is that being stopped?
If you just bear with us, Chair, we have been.
The position that we have been given on that, Chairman, which was reflected in our correspondence to of the 12th of December, still stands. I mean, I had spoken with the policy colleagues who lead on that before coming to the committee appearance this afternoon, and there's been no change in the position that we had reported on the 12th of December. Broadly, that due to budgetary constraints, it's not been possible to allocate funds to the capacity building fund. That's the current position. And
what are the implications then for the European Forum, the one that was set up by Belfast City Council and is now, I think, co-chaired by the Council and the Department?
Well, again, the position on that, Chairman, remains the same as in the letter of the 12th, that the Department is committed to the overall aims and objectives of the fund. It's increased support to NERF through the secondment of an OFMDFM official. And that remains the current position, but it could well be subject to change given the budgetary crisis that we're facing.
Is that forum at risk?
Well, the forum is chaired jointly, Chairman, between the Department and Belfast City Council. So I suppose there are two parties involved in that process that need to make the assessment. But I would imagine it's for consideration moving forward.
What's your assessment, Paul?
My assessment remains that, as stated in the letter to the committee of the 12th, Chairman, I can't go beyond that because it's not within my policy remit. A particular fund is not ours.
Okay. Brenda Hale, I'd like to ask.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, gentlemen, to committee. I suppose I speak to a recommendation 10 and also to objective 3 in building a positive profile. You talk about opportunities for secondment. In military speak, how long is a posting to Brussels and how easy is it to recruit civil service staff to Brussels? And I suppose I have concerns that during turnover of staff and handover that connections and knowledge may be temporarily lost, and do you think a secondment would help bridge any possible knowledge loss, and will it help increase our competitiveness?
Well, again, Chair, if I could address those in order. The length of time, first of all, it would vary depending on the secondment. The normal secondment period would be 2 years, but that can be reviewed and extended as appropriate. And that has happened in certain cases where an Northern Civil Servant has been seconded to the Commission. The Commission have requested that they, because of the particularly effective job they were doing, should stay on a bit longer. So that it is flexible in that sense. I think optimally you would need to have 2 years for someone to, even with some prior knowledge of European procedures, to get up to speed. It does make us more competitive. I'm sorry, I'm jumping to your last question. It does make us, in that it gives us an inside track, while not wanting to compromise our secondees within particular institutions. We do get very, very good briefing, and we would pass that briefing, or that briefing goes directly to departments to act on as appropriate. So I think that there's an element of advantage to be had in having our civil servants, located close to where the key decisions are being taken. I'm sorry, there was a third.
It was the loss of knowledge, because it's been suggested to me that handover between someone leaving post and someone coming into post, that there hasn't been a long enough handover period to introduce them to their connections and raising the profile of the incoming. Well,
again, there's always that risk. Particularly when you can't coordinate the leaving, the end of one secondment with the commencement of another. There is a corporate memory in terms of those officials who are there over a longer period of time, such as myself. So we would be a source of induction and training for those incoming civil servants. The question about the lack of interest, I will be honest that I sometimes I'm surprised that there isn't more interest from this end. on opportunities. We're obviously aware of the benefits of that experience for any civil servant or any public sector worker. It exposes people to a range of very important policy areas at a very high level, and they acquire skills, competences which would be relevant to their careers. So we don't have the interest that we would like to have, but we haven't failed to fill a post yet, and we've got very good people in all our secondment posts in the institutions and the permanent representations.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Jimmy Spratt.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Just in terms of, supposed to follow on from where Brenda was, it's not the case that in many cases that desk officers, Jerry, only spend 6 months?
Through the Chair, no. Desk officers would normally be located there for about 2 years.
Right.
6 months.
So there's no history of 6 months, tenures, people leaving?
There's not during my time in the office. There may have been an officer, and indeed, I know of one officer, but he wasn't. He wasn't in the executive office, but left when it was through his own choice, when he decided that he wasn't getting enough from the post.
In terms of new funding streams, how quickly now are the desk officers and your staff getting information to departments ahead of, you obviously within Europe, new funding streams coming out are known or are talked about some considerable time before there's any official announcement.
That's right.
So how quickly now are your folks getting to departments potential funding streams where European funding can be got? And tell us how you measure that effectiveness and how you know that from your end that you have passed the information to the departments here.
Well, taking the latter point, we would know inasmuch as the funding opportunities database will have been provided to departments as well as to other stakeholders, in that it's not only departments who are eligible.
That's not the question I'm asking you, Jerry.
Right.
I'm asking you what the advice that your desk officers or your staff pass to departments saying, look, here's a funding stream. There's a good possibility that effectively Northern Ireland could score out of getting some money from the Commission in relation to this new funding stream, which is coming out in 6 months or 9 months' time. We know about it, and you need to start doing some proactive work within the department. How do you measure that and make sure that effectively that has been passed on? I'm not interested in databases or anything else. I'm interested in the advice that's coming out from your folk to say, here's a potential area. How do you measure that, and how do you make sure that that has been funded? I think that's, it's fair, but it has to be measured at your end, because you should have your finger in the pulse. Your staff should have your finger in the pulse across there.
Well, again, through the Chair, if we're talking about measurement, we're talking about something that is essentially qualitative, and that is the feedback that we get from departments about the usefulness of the
Here we're back at the departments again and the databases and what the departments do. It seems to me that you want to throw the onus on the departments over here, that they're proactively working, but you're over there in the heart of the situation. And what I want to know is, these new funding streams coming on, you say to the Department of Health or Department of whatever, here's a potential for Northern Ireland PLC. I would expect that there would be some follow-up on that to make sure that the departments were being proactive, that you were getting them out there to meet the right people, you were getting information to them very early so that they could start, because it has happened in some departments here, and I know that you have had some input to it. But in other cases, there's examples of where potentially your office was saying, well, there's no chance of getting money out of that. It's going to go to some of the other countries that have recently come into the European Union. but Northern Ireland has actually scored out of them. So you need to be proactive across there. That's why you're there. So I'm only asking you, what follow-up? How do you make sure that it's being followed up from whatever department it is?
Well, where a department is in receipt of advice from officials in the office, officials would be in contact with the department on an ongoing basis and would certainly want to follow up with the department followed through on particular applications or funding opportunities or events. We would have regular visits from departmental officials who are responsible for these funding streams. And that's our opportunity to assess whether they feel that what we're doing is useful, whether we're getting information to them any quicker than they would have otherwise got. And I'm confident that again, I have to refer to the databases, that information is now much more live and online than it ever has been in the past. Now, in the light of what you say, yes, we don't have a systematic, routine surveying of the outcome of advice. What I could and will do is is for every notification of a funding opportunity, I will ask for the particular organisation or department to indicate whether they're going to take that forward and if they've been successful, so we can then collate information on success stories. Now, I think you've prompted an idea which I'd like to follow up on. That will supplement the qualitative feedback we get from departments, which is very positive, with something slightly more routine and systematic. So I take the point.
On your pay grade, Jerry, I shouldn't have to prompt you. Just park it at that.
Okay. I don't want to rehearse the whole history of benchmarking, Jerry. We know we started looking at the Republic and then realised that's not comparing apples with apples. But the 13-14 Priorities Implementation Plan states that benchmarking had a deadline for completion by all departments of October 2014. So was that met, and where are we with benchmarking?
But Jared, the benchmarking exercise was taken forward by the interdepartmental group because of its relevance to all the departments on that group, chaired by the junior ministers. That group decided that it wanted to have a review of the quality of the data that was available to us for benchmarking, and it commissioned the study that was referred to by the Northern Ireland Statistics and Research Agency. We have recently taken the report from NISRA, and that report will be considered on the 18th of this month by the interdepartmental group, and subject to their views, we will certainly be happy to make that available.
Benchmarking was in the programme for government. We're now in the next EU funding round, 2014-2020. We'll have a document referring to developing a benchmarking process, and yet we had that target that I've just referred to. It looks like an absolute mess, Jerry. Why can you not say benchmarking will be done on best in class, and best in class are X, Y, and Z?
Well, Chair, we do benchmark against those regions that we know are doing well in particular programme areas. Right. And you just have to look at the partnership agreements on the health side in terms of the progress we're making on connected health. And
who are best in class in connected health?
Finland, the Catalonia and Basque Country are among some of the regions that are doing particularly well. Or Austria. I mean, there are a number of regions that are doing well, and there is now a collaborative network established, which our Department of Health and Social Services chairs, with a view to benchmarking, with a view to establishing collaborative partnerships, and ultimately putting applications forward for funding. So that work is ongoing. What it doesn't have available to it is, at the moment, a central source of information that allows it to compare statistically our performance in drawing down funds against the best in class, because that data, and the report has raised, I can't go into the detail of the report, but the report has raised some concerns about the data quality. So, given those concerns, we need to look at that and see what alternatives there are. We have produced reports from the office on individual programmes, such as the connected health, the transport programmes, and we have been able to compare the level of uptake by programme, but only in as much as we have access to the relevant information. So the exercise is not being done in a central way based on a reliable source of central data from the Commission. The exercise is being done through the contacts we have with individual regions and through our knowledge of drawdown on particular programmes. So there is benchmarking going on, but not as a single exercise.
Is it retrospective?
It would be retrospective, because if you take the reports published by the Commission on particular projects on, say, surface transport, they will give a comprehensive list of all the projects by region, by institution, and we can look at those and we can see which particular institutions are drawing down most, and then the relevant departments can decide if they want to target those institutions or target those particular regions for cooperation in the future.
Is it possible, and is there merit in trying not to be retrospective, in saying, for example, when it comes to Horizon 2020, we would expect Catalonia and Finland to be very good, and we're going to compete and better them, and that's a target?
I would prefer to think in terms of cooperation and collaboration rather than competing and bettering, Chair, because when you know that an organisation is doing particularly well, then that's the organisation that you'll want to do business with and learn from. So the emphasis in successful applications is through having prestigious partners along with you on a particular project.
Yeah,
so if you can identify who those prestigious partners are, you have a better chance of having a successful application.
I get the logic of that, Jerry, but I would also suggest to you, if you go out and ask the taxpayer, they do want you to be competitive. They want the money coming into Northern Ireland, not going to Catalonia or Finland. By
definition, the process is competitive. But if it's not a paradox, within a competitive process, you have active collaboration and cooperation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's the reality, which is sometimes a difficult sell. Future of the task force, then, Commissioner Cretu, I think maybe went further than her brief on one occasion in saying it was going to survive. Would that be fair?
Well, I can't comment on the specific brief, Chair, but I know that Commissioner Cretu did commit during the debate on the peace process to bring a positive recommendation to President Juncker. Yeah. Now, I'm not aware as to whether that has happened, but I would hope that in the not-too-distant future we'll have some feedback from the Commissioner on the outcome of that. I know that we have lobbied for other support from other commissioners, and I'm confident there will be a number of voices that will be reinforcing the recommendation that the work of the task force continues. And I'm assuming, Chair, you too would endorse that, that given your own inquiry recommendations, that approach. So we haven't yet confirmation of President Juncker's intention, but we would be hopeful at this stage.
And we would certainly be keen that you would use our recommendations.
Well, indeed, we have, and you'll be aware of the report by the Commission, which used to a large extent its submission to this committee as a significant amount of the evidence for the value of the task force.
Two other issues. We have a joint ministerial council, of course, in Europe. Now, the Smith Commission, coming out of the Scottish independence vote, has made some recommendations on how to improve the JMC. Have you taken a position on that?
Paul, have you? I'll invite Paul, who will have direct contact with the colleagues in Scotland.
Yes, Chairman. I mean, part of my remit is to maintain contact with Edinburgh and Cardiff and with London on these matters through the JMCE. The committee is probably very well aware that this relates to a fairly broad range of relations between the UK government and the devolved administration, so it's not just about Europe. And the matter will be progressed initially at official level, so senior officials will meet to map out the scope of a programme of work and the timeline for it, reporting back to ministers. That process will initiate towards the end of this month. And as a consequence of that, we don't have a position on it at the minute. Okay. It also relates, of course, to the Silk Commission report for Wales as well. So that process of work is just just about to initiate.
My final area is the review of competences, which is obviously the foundation stone that the Prime Minister envisages that will lead on to a renegotiation and potentially a referendum. What level of engagement, how many submissions have come out of Northern Ireland into that?
Chairman, I'm not certain because the process has been ongoing for 2 years. There were 4 semesters, and the executive and its ministers determined that the ministers with sectoral portfolios would engage as they saw fit. But Northern Ireland departments and stakeholders have engaged. I'm not certain on the total magnitude. All of the reports are now concluded and published and are available online. There is no concluding report, and therefore the issue as to where the balance of power rests between Europe and the UK government is not formally defined in written form. It's left very much to the political parties and other stakeholders to assess that for themselves. But the purpose of the balance of competences review was to perform an audit. So it's effectively a technical analysis, giving examples of where the balance of power is thought to rest. And it's for others to determine that. Certainly there will be no summary report prepared for that exercise.
Okay, that's useful. If the committee is content, Paul and Jerry, as ever, thank you very much indeed.
Members, thank you very much.
Okay, members, just on foot of that, can I ask if you are content to forward some papers to the relevant statutory committees for their information, those being the 13-14 implementation plan, 13-14 implementation plan, 14-15 priorities, the 14-15 mid-year review, and correspondence on funding drawdown to statutory committees, plus finally the Director's report from the Office of the Northern Ireland Executive in Brussels.
Great.
Thank you very much. Now, another series of questions with regard to information we may wish to seek from the Department. Specific timescales for the relevant stages of completion of the priorities publication process, which seems to be back to front at the moment. Timeline for completion and implementation of the benchmarking exercise. Yeah. Results of the Framework 7 benchmarking exercise, which was completed in October last. Results of the benchmarking of the Competitive and Innovation Framework Programme, CIP. Further information on what is meant by the target, quote, provide departmental committees with a summary of all EU proposals impacting the department twice yearly. That's the one where it seems the green may be a red. And copies of the previous and future twice yearly briefs on dossiers of Northern Ireland interest covering significant issues of importance to relevant parties. Thank you. Okay. Finally, members, and agenda item 7. In December, we commissioned Assembly Research to provide us with an update on the action points which this committee had identified in the European Commission Work Programme as priorities for 2014. That's page 301 of your information packs. The question is, do members wish to take a short oral briefing from Assembly Research on EU issues relevant to OFMDFM? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, at our last meeting we commissioned Assembly Research to commission an analysis of the European Commission Work Programme, identifying areas of potential interest for each statutory committee. The Commission Work Programme is a key document, as the Commission alone has the right of initiative within the European Union. The paper is available to you at page 310 of your packs. It's already been circulated to the statutory committees as agreed at our last meeting. The EU Committee at the House of Lords will be writing to the European Commission on February the 10th with views on the Commission's work programme. Any input needs to be with the House of Lords Committee by tomorrow. So, members, are you content to send the research paper to the House of Lords Committee and also to the relevant committees in the House of Commons, Scottish Parliament and National Assembly for Wales for the information? Thank you. Forward Work Programme. Forward Work Programme was issued in your papers and it's at page 365. Are we content with that? Do we need to talk about this?
In next week's pack, yeah.
Right. So in next week's pack, members will give you a timeline with regard to the children's provisions. We are not going to be able to do the statutory sort of 30-day stage. We're going to have to knock it back, but Kathy's got a timeline which will...
There was one thing struck me and I didn't want to go back to. You know the list that we talked about earlier that we couldn't possibly...
the 160?
It just struck me that the many of the what will be defunct 26 councils were involved. I noticed several councils, I can't remember how many, but
they were all in it.
You know, by the end of March, they're basically history, and we're into the new RPA 11. So it might be it's only a comment just for staff from staff point of view, because
go for the 11 rather than the 26.
Well, there doesn't seem to be much point in you know. It might be better dealing with the statutory bodies at the minute. You know, the statutory councils, because they're going to be up, you know, by the end of March before we have even got close to publication.
Will we put it through NILGA?
Could be done through NILGA or something like that. Yeah.
Single point. That covers the 26th and the 11th. Yeah? Yep. Good. Thanks, Jimmy.
Makes life easier a bit. You
Absolutely. Any other business? If not, we're adjourned until Wednesday the 11th at 2 p.m. in room 30. Thank you very much.